Welcome back, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F.
Okay.
We're going to be pulling some excerpts from chapters 1, 8, and 9.
Sounds good.
And I'm really curious to see how these ideas kind of challenge our typical expectations of, like happiness and success and all that.
Yeah, and interesting how he kind of goes against the grain of a lot of the typical self-help advice out there.
Right.
Suggesting that maybe there's actually power in like accepting the negative instead of constantly chasing after positivity.
So it's a total mind shift. And he kicks it off with this quote on Charles Bukowski's tombstone that just says, "Don't try."
Oh, wow.
And, Bukowski wasn't exactly known for, like, playing by the rules. He was an alcoholic womanizer, kind of like what you might call a loser in a lot of ways.
Right.
But somehow became this, like, celebrated writer.
Yeah, and that's that paradox that Manson kind of wants us to look at. Bukowski, he didn't become successful by trying to fit in or be someone he wasn't. Right. His writing really resonated because it was so raw and honest and unapologetically him.
Yeah.
Which kind of makes you think about all the pressure we feel today to present this perfect image of ourselves, especially on social media.
Oh, totally.
Like we're constantly bombarded with everybody else's highlight reel.
Right.
It makes it so easy to fall into that trap of comparison and feeling inadequate.
And that's where he talks about the feedback loop from hell.
Oh, yeah.
Which is just like this, never-ending cycle of, feeling bad about feeling bad.
Right.
Like you see someone's amazing vacation photos online and suddenly your own life seems dull and boring.
Yeah.
And then you beat yourself up for not being happy, which only makes you feel worse.
Totally. And that's where his backwards law comes in.
Okay.
He argues that the more you pursue happiness, the more elusive it becomes. It's kind of like when you desperately want something, let's say you're fixated on becoming rich.
Yeah.
That constant pursuit of wealth might actually make you feel poorer and more inadequate no matter how much money you actually have.
Right.
And the same goes for happiness.
Yep.
The harder you chase it, the more you're highlighting its absence in your life.
So instead of striving for like this constant happiness, he's suggesting we need to like get comfortable with experiencing the negative.
Yeah, and he introduces this concept of the disappointment panda.
The disappointment panda, what is that?
Think of it as like this brutally honest friend.
Okay.
Who just forces you to confront those uncomfortable truths that you'd rather avoid.
Okay.
And it's not about like wallowing in negativity, but it's recognizing that even disappointment and suffering have a purpose.
Okay.
Throughout evolution, discomfort has always pushed us to adapt and innovate.
Oh, interesting.
Even just like the simple act of stubbing your toe.
Yeah.
It hurts like hell, but it teaches you to be more aware of your surroundings, right? So you don't do it again.
I guess you could say emotional pain serves a similar purpose, like the heartbreak after a bad relationship. It might push you to make healthier choices in the future.
Exactly.
Actually, thinking about it now, I had this one experience where...
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe we can circle back to that later. So if suffering can be beneficial, does that mean we should, like, actively seek it out?
No, not quite.
Yeah.
He's not saying you should go out looking for pain or anything.
Right.
It's more about acknowledging that suffering is an inevitable part of life.
Okay.
And instead of fearing it or trying to avoid it, we can learn to see those difficult experiences as opportunities for growth and change.
So maybe instead of asking ourselves, how can I be happy all the time? The better question might be, what are the right, values to prioritize in my life?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's a great segue into another key point that Manson makes about choosing the right values.
Okay.
And he uses these contrasting examples of two musicians, Dave Mustaine and Pete Best.
Okay. I know Dave Mustaine from Megadeth, but remind me who Pete Best is.
He was the original drummer for the Beatles.
Oh, wow.
But he got kicked out right before they hit it big.
Oh, man.
And you'd think that kind of rejection would be devastating, but it's fascinating how their contrasting values actually led to very different outcomes.
So Mustaine, even though he achieved massive success with Megadeth, he always felt like a failure.
Yeah, because his metric for success was basically being bigger than Metallica.
Ah, his old band.
Exactly. He was stuck in this comparison trap,
Right.
clinging to a value system that ultimately fueled his unhappiness.
Right.
Whereas Pete Best, despite missing out on that global fame of the Beatles, he actually found fulfillment in a steady career and family life.
Okay.
He prioritized different metrics for success.
And ultimately, those choices brought him happiness.
Exactly.
So it's not just about achieving success, it's about defining what success actually means to you.
Right. And that's something that's really important to keep in mind as we navigate our own lives.
So their stories highlight how the values we choose can either empower us or hold us back.
Or sure.
It seems like questioning those values is essential, even in the face of what might seem like failure.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this is making me think about Manson's whole experience in Russia.
Oh, yeah. What about
What does blunt honesty have to do with any of this?
Well, his time in Russia was really a turning point in his understanding of honesty and boundaries.
Okay,
He found that the direct, often blunt communication style of Russian culture,
right?
while it was initially jarring, actually fostered a deeper sense of trust and genuine connection.
So by dropping the social niceties, people were forced to be more authentic in their interactions.
Exactly. It's like embracing those uncomfortable moments actually led to more meaningful relationships.
Huh. Interesting. And so he connects that to like setting boundaries in our own lives.
Exactly. Even if it means risking rejection.
Okay.
He even uses the example of Romeo and Juliet.
Wait, hold on. Romeo and Juliet?
Yeah, think about it. Their passionate love story was fueled by this complete lack of boundaries,
Okay.
a willingness to defy their families and risk everything for each other.
Oh,
And
yeah.
while it makes for a captivating story,
Sure.
it ultimately ends in tragedy.
Right.
Their love was all-consuming,
Yeah.
and their inability to set healthy boundaries ultimately led to their downfall.
So how does that relate to us in everyday life? It's not like we're all running off to elope in secret.
Well, it's about recognizing that healthy boundaries are essential for any relationship.
Okay.
They're about defining where you end and another person begins.
Right.
It's about choosing what you're willing to tolerate, what you're willing to compromise on, and what you absolutely won't stand for.
So is setting boundaries essentially about choosing what to give a fuck about?
That's a great way to put it.
Uh-huh.
It's about consciously choosing what you're willing to invest your time and energy in,
Right.
and being okay with rejecting the things that don't align with your values.
I'm starting to see how all these ideas connect. By rejecting what doesn't serve us, we can create space for the things that truly matter.
Exactly.
This all makes a lot of sense, but it brings up a question for me.
Okay, what's that?
How do we even know what those things are? What if we're completely wrong about what we think we should give a fuck about? It seems like we need some kind of guiding principle to help us figure that out.
You're absolutely right.
Hmm.
And that's where Manson introduces the concept of facing our mortality to find meaning.
Okay.
He describes his own experience confronting his fear of death at the Cape of Good Hope.
Wait, did he jump off a cliff or something?
No, not exactly. He gradually inched closer and closer to the edge,
Okay.
facing his fear head on. It's a powerful metaphor for confronting our own mortality and using that awareness to guide our choices.
So instead of avoiding the thought of death, we should use it as motivation to live more intentionally.
Exactly. By accepting our mortality, we can free ourselves from the fear that drives those immortality projects that Ernest Becker talked about.
Remind me, what are those again?
Well, Becker argued that a lot of human behavior is driven by this unconscious fear of death.
Right.
So we create these projects, building legacies, seeking fame, accumulating wealth, all in an attempt to leave something lasting behind, to prove that our lives had meaning.
So we're essentially trying to cheat death by creating something that will outlive us.
In a way, yeah.
But how does that become a trap?
Well, while these projects can be motivating, they can also become all-consuming.
Right.
We can become so fixated on achieving them that we lose sight of what truly matters.
Things like.
Connection, love, creativity. Simply experiencing life in the present moment.
So Manson's suggesting that maybe accepting the reality of death can free us from this like frantic pursuit of immortality.
Exactly. It allows us to choose more meaningful values that aren't driven by this need to leave a legacy.
It's a pretty intense concept, but I have to admit the idea of using death as a compass for life is, well, it's definitely something to think about.
It is a powerful idea.
It seems like we've only just scratched the surface of what Manson has to offer.
We definitely have a lot more to unpack.
But maybe that's a good place to pause for now.
Yeah, let's take a break and come back to this.
Sounds good. We'll be back soon to dive deeper into his ideas on challenging our beliefs, taking action, and ultimately living a more meaningful life.
I'm looking forward to it. So we've talked about like choosing what to give a fuck about, right?
Right.
But I'm sure some of you are wondering like, okay, how do I actually put that into practice?
Yeah, like I love big picture ideas, but I also want like the practical tools,
Exactly.
to help me actually apply these concepts in my everyday life.
Well, one of the most powerful tools that Manson offers is something he calls the "what if I'm wrong" question.
What if I'm wrong? Okay.
Yeah, it's about challenging our own beliefs and acknowledging that our perspective is really just one interpretation of reality.
That makes me think of that saying like, everyone thinks they're the hero of their own story.
Exactly.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own point of view that we forget other people might see things completely differently.
Totally. And Manson illustrates this with a story about a friend whose brother was completely convinced that she was making a huge mistake by getting engaged. He was so certain of his own judgment that he couldn't see the situation clearly.
So he was letting his own fears and biases like cloud his perception of his sister's relationship.
Exactly. And this happens all the time, right?
Oh, yeah.
We form opinions based on our own experiences, our own values, our own fears.
Right.
And sometimes those opinions can really prevent us from seeing the bigger picture.
Yeah. So what do we do?
Well, Manson suggests that asking ourselves, what if I'm wrong, can be a really powerful way to step outside of our own limited perspective and consider other viewpoints.
It's like hitting the pause button on our assumptions and forcing ourselves to consider other possibilities.
Exactly.
Hmm.
It's a simple question, but it can have a huge impact on how we approach like conflicts, relationships, all sorts of things.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so besides asking what if I'm wrong, what else can we do?
Well, another key principle that Manson emphasizes is the do something principle.
Do something. Go.
It's about taking action even when you don't feel motivated or when you're afraid of failing.
Oh man, this one hits close to home. I am so guilty of overthinking things and letting fear hold me back.
Well, Manson actually shares a story about how when he was first starting his online business,
Okay.
he was totally paralyzed by fear and uncertainty.
I can relate.
He was stuck in this procrastination loop, just letting his anxieties dictate his actions.
Ooh, I know that feeling.
But then he remembered a piece of advice that his high school math teacher had given him.
What was that?
His teacher said, if you're stuck on a problem, don't just sit there and think about it. Just start working on it. Even if you don't know what you're doing, the simple act of working on it will eventually cause the right ideas to show up in your head.
It's like that saying, a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step, you know?
Exactly.
Sometimes just getting started is the hardest part.
And what Manson found is that action often precedes motivation.
That's interesting.
You know, we tend to think that we need to feel inspired before we can take action, but
Yeah.
sometimes it's actually the other way around.
So by just doing something, anything, we create momentum, and that momentum can actually fuel our motivation.
Exactly.
But-
It's like the feeling you get when you finally start working on a project that you've been putting off.
Right.
Once you get going, it's not so bad.
Yeah.
And you actually start to enjoy the process.
Yeah, totally. But what if we're taking action towards the wrong goals? You know, what if we're putting all this effort into something that's not actually aligned with our values?
That's a great point. And that's where the do something principle connects back to that idea of choosing the right values.
Okay, I see the connection.
Instead of focusing on outcomes that are outside of our control, like success or fame,
Right.
we can choose values that are based on action,
Like what?
like creativity, honesty, and just the willingness to try new things.
So even if we don't achieve the specific outcome that we were hoping for,
Right.
we're still living in alignment with our values. We're still making progress.
Exactly. Manson even draws this parallel to poker, this idea that we're all dealt a certain hand in life. But it's the choices that we make with those cards that ultimately determine our success.
So it's not about getting lucky or being dealt the perfect hand.
Right.
It's about playing the hand we're given to the best of our ability.
Exactly. And that comes back to this subtle art of choosing what to give a fuck about.
This is all making a lot of sense, but it brings up another question for me.
Okay, go ahead.
How do we choose the right values? Yet, you know, what if the values that we're currently living by aren't actually serving us anymore?
That's a really important question. And that's something that Manson explores in depth in the book.
Okay.
He talks about the importance of honesty,
Okay.
both with ourselves and with others,
Right.
in order to really determine which values truly resonate with us.
So it's about getting real with ourselves and figuring out what actually matters.
Exactly. And he also talks about the need to set boundaries even in relationships
Okay.
to protect our well-being and create a space for genuine connection.
So those boundaries are like crucial for making sure that we're not sacrificing our own values to please others.
Exactly. And that ties into another important concept that Manson brings up, trust.
Okay.
Trust isn't something that's just given freely. It's earned through consistent action and honest communication.
So it's not enough to just say the right things.
Yeah,
Our actions actually need to align with our words.
exactly.
Yeah,
And if that trust is broken, it can be really difficult to rebuild.
for sure. And he uses the example of like infidelity in a relationship to illustrate this point, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
He says that if someone breaks your trust, The first step towards reconciliation is for them to acknowledge the values that led to the betrayal
Okay.
and to take ownership of their actions.
So it's not about making excuses or blaming others.
They're
It's
not.
about taking responsibility for the consequences of your choices.
Exactly. And then it's about proving through your actions that you've changed and that you're worthy of that trust again.
So it's a process that requires patience, commitment, a willingness to be vulnerable.
Absolutely. And Manson emphasizes that this process of rebuilding trust applies to any relationship,
Okay.
not just romantic ones. So whether it's with a friend, a family member, a colleague, restoring trust requires honesty, accountability, and consistent effort.
This is making me think about another key aspect of Manson's philosophy, this whole idea of commitment.
Oh yeah, that's a big one.
Especially in today's world where we have so many options, you know?
It's easy to get caught up in chasing the next best thing, constantly seeking novelty and excitement,
Right.
but never really investing ourselves fully in anything.
It's like that fear of missing out phenomenon.
Exactly.
We feel like we need to try everything, experience everything, but in doing so, we might be missing out on the rewards of depth and commitment.
Right. Manson seems to be suggesting that true fulfillment actually comes from choosing to go deep,
Okay.
to invest yourself fully in something, even if it means rejecting other possibilities.
And he uses his own experience as an example.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly. He
Yeah.
talks about how when he was younger, he was all about traveling the world, experiencing different cultures,
Yeah.
keeping his options open. It's like that classic digital nomad lifestyle.
Right. The allure of freedom and adventure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as he got older, he realized that commitment in its own way can be just as liberating as constant exploration.
How so?
By choosing to focus his energy and attention on a few key areas of his life,
Okay.
he was able to achieve a level of depth and fulfillment that wouldn't have been possible otherwise.
So it's not about limiting your options.
Right?
It's about consciously choosing where to invest your time and energy.
Exactly. It's recognizing that we can't have it all, and that's okay.
And Manson actually argues that this process of rejection is a form of liberation.
Interesting.
It's about saying no to the things that don't align with our values
Right.
so that we can say yes to the things that truly matter.
It's a really different way of looking at rejection.
Yeah.
Instead of seeing it as this negative experience,
Right.
we can view it as a way of creating space for the things that bring us joy and meaning.
Oh, okay, that's a good way to look at it. So this idea of choosing the right values leads us to another crucial aspect of Manson's philosophy, this importance of questioning our beliefs. Oh, yeah, that's huge.
Our brains are constantly trying to make sense of the world, right?
All the time.
Seeking patterns and explanations for everything.
But that process can sometimes lead us astray.
So we end up clinging to beliefs that might be outdated or simply wrong,
Right.
even if they're no longer serving us.
Exactly. And Manson uses this really powerful example of a woman who, through therapy, came to believe that her father had sexually abused her as a child.
Wow, okay.
And this belief led to this huge rift in her family.
Right.
You know, she confronted her father based on this recovered memory.
Okay.
But years later, she actually realized that she had invented the memory.
Oh,
The trauma of her childhood, combined with the prevailing cultural narratives about sexual abuse,
right.
had led her to create this false narrative that she believed to be true.
That's a heartbreaking story. And it highlights how easily our beliefs can shape our reality even when those beliefs aren't based in fact. It makes you wonder how many other beliefs we're holding on to that might not actually be true. And that's exactly Manson's point. He argues that we need to be willing to question our own beliefs, even the ones that feel deeply ingrained. And this ties into his point about the dangers of certainty.
The dangers of certainty.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's so dangerous about being certain?
Well, when we become too attached to our beliefs, we become closed off to new information,
Yeah.
new experiences, new perspectives. And this can lead to all sorts of problems.
Like what?
Interpersonal conflicts, societal divisions, you name it.
It's like we're putting on these blinders,
Yeah.
filtering out anything that doesn't fit into our existing worldview.
Exactly. And that can prevent us from learning and growing.
So how do we avoid that trap?
Well, Manson uses the example of like religious fanatics and racists.
Okay,
Individuals who are so certain of their own righteousness
right,
that they're willing to inflict harm on others.
right.
This highlights how dangerous certainty can be, how it can actually blind us to the humanity of others.
It seems like cultivating a sense of humility. A willingness to admit that we might be wrong is essential for creating a more compassionate and understanding world.
Absolutely. It's about recognizing that our perspective is just one interpretation of reality. and
Right.
that other people's perspective, even if we disagree with them, are equally valid.
This idea of embracing uncertainty is a little bit unsettling,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly freeing, you know?
It is.
It allows us to let go of the need to be right,
Right.
to control everything, and to just be present in each moment as it unfolds.
It's about recognizing that we're all flawed, we're all on a journey, and that there's no one right way to live.
And this resonates with what Manson said about facing our mortality. It seems
Right.
like he's suggesting that accepting the inevitability of death can actually help us to live more fully in the present moment.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to the heart of Manson's exploration of death.
Okay.
Not as this morbid topic.
Yeah.
There is a guiding principle for choosing how we live.
Now, I'm really curious. How does he connect death to living a more meaningful life?
Well, he shares this incredible story about facing his fear of heights at the Cape of Good Hope,
Okay.
literally inching closer and closer to the edge of a cliff.
Wait, is this the cliff jumping incident I was imagining earlier?
No, he didn't jump,
Okay, good.
but he did confront his fear in a very visceral way.
Okay.
He describes this experience of his body's survival instincts, kicking in this overwhelming fear and anxiety,
Right.
and then this gradual shift in perspective as he chooses to lean into the discomfort.
So by facing his fear head on, he was able to move through it and gain a new perspective.
Exactly. He talks about how at first he was terrified, but as he sat there looking out at this vastness of the ocean, he felt this strange sense of peace.
Huh.
It's like facing the reality of his own mortality allowed him to let go of the things that no longer mattered.
It's a powerful image. It seems like he's saying that by acknowledging our own mortality, we can actually free ourselves to live more authentically.
Exactly. And this experience really connects back to Ernest Becker's work on immortality projects.
Mm.
Becker argued that a lot of human behavior is driven by this unconscious fear of death.
Right. So we create these elaborate projects.
Exactly. Legacies, fame, wealth, all as a way to transcend our own mortality.
It's like we're trying to leave our mark on the world
Right.
to prove that our lives had meaning.
Exactly.
Right.
But Manson suggests that these projects, while they can be motivating, can also become a trap.
Okay.
We can become so fixated on achieving them that we lose sight of what truly matters.
So it's not about abandoning our ambitions or giving up on our goals.
Right.
It's about recognizing that they're ultimately finite and choosing to focus on the things that truly matter to us, regardless of whether they leave a lasting legacy.
Exactly. Manson argues that by accepting the reality of death, we can actually free ourselves from this frantic pursuit of immortality.
It's a powerful shift in perspective. Instead of fearing death, we can use it as a compass to guide our lives.
Yeah, it reminds me of something you mentioned earlier about death being the ultimate metric for evaluating our values. That's right. Manson isn't saying we should become morbid or obsessed with death,
Right.
but he does suggest that we use it as a lens through which to view our lives, our choices, our priorities.
So it's about asking ourselves, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, what would I do differently today?
Exactly. What would you prioritize? What would you let go of?
It's a powerful question, and it really forces us to confront what truly matters.
Like, if you only had a limited amount of time left, would you really waste it on things that don't bring you joy or fulfillment?
Probably not.
Hmm.
This realization can be incredibly liberating.
It is.
It allows us to let go of the things that don't truly matter and focus on what brings us joy and meaning.
To live more fully in the present moment.
And it all comes back to choosing what to give a fuck about.
Exactly.
Not in a careless or apathetic way, but in a conscious and deliberate way.
Exactly. It's about being intentional with our time and energy, recognizing that they're limited resources, and investing them in things that align with our values.
So it's about saying no to the things that drain us, that don't serve us. Right.
So that we can say yes to the things that truly matter.
It's about embracing our flaws, accepting our limitations, and finding beauty in the messy reality of being human.
And ultimately, it's about letting go of the need to have it all figured out and just being present in each moment as it unfolds.
And Manson actually ends the book with this really touching story about encountering a stranger at the Cape of Good Hope after his experience at the cliff's edge.
Okay.
The stranger, seeing his exhilaration, asked if he was okay.
Okay.
And Manson simply replied, alive.
Yeah.
Very alive.
I love that. It really captures the essence of what he's trying to convey.
Yeah.
It's not about avoiding pain or seeking constant happiness.
Right.
It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
The good, the bad, and everything in between.
Exactly. It's about finding meaning and purpose in the face of our own mortality and choosing to live a life that is authentic, courageous, and full of love.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the subtle art of not giving an F, I encourage you to consider Manson's final challenge.
If death is our compass, what values should guide your life? What truly matters to you?
It's a question worth pondering, and it's one that we hope this deep dive has inspired you to explore further. If you haven't already, we highly recommend checking out the book and continuing this journey of self-discovery. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.
So we've covered a lot of ground, but I think it's worth circling back to this idea of facing our mortality.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely a theme that keeps coming up.
Right. And I think Manson's story about the Cape of Good Hope really brings it into focus.
Yeah.
It wasn't just about conquering a fear of heights.
Sure.
It was a deliberate choice to confront the reality of his own existence, his own eventual non-existence.
It's interesting because it almost seems like he was choosing to embrace the feeling of being alive
Yeah,
by acknowledging the possibility of not being alive.
that's a really great way to put it. He wasn't trying to be reckless or anything, but he was intentionally stepping outside his comfort zone to experience a different way of relating to life and death. And that experience, as unsettling as it might seem, actually brought him a sense of peace.
So how does this tie back to like the whole choosing what to give a fuck about thing?
Well, Manson connected this experience back to Ernest Becker's work on immortality projects.
Okay.
Remember, Becker argued that a lot of human behavior is driven by this subconscious fear of death.
Right, so we create these legacies and seek fame and amass wealth.
Exactly, all in an attempt to leave something lasting behind, to prove that our lives had meaning.
It's like we're trying to cheat death by creating something that will outlive us.
In a way, yeah.
Yeah.
But Manson suggests that these projects, while they can be motivating, can also become a trap. We can get so fixated on achieving them that we actually lose sight of what truly matters.
So it's not about like giving up on our goals or anything.
Right.
But it's about recognizing that they're ultimately finite and choosing to focus on what really matters to us.
Exactly. And what Manson's saying is that by accepting the reality of death, we can free ourselves from this constant pursuit of immortality.
It's a pretty powerful shift in perspective.
It is. Instead of fearing death, we can use it as a compass to guide our lives.
Which brings us back to that idea you mentioned earlier about death being the ultimate metric for evaluating our values.
Right, exactly. And Manson isn't saying we should become morbid or obsessed with death or anything, but he is suggesting that we use it as a lens through which to view our lives, our choices, our priorities.
So like asking ourselves, if I knew I was going to die tomorrow, what would I do differently today?
Exactly. What would you prioritize? What would you let go of?
It's a pretty heavy question, but I think it's an important one to ask.
I agree. And this realization that our time is limited can be incredibly liberating. It allows us to let go of the things that don't really matter and focus on what brings us joy and meaning to live more fully in the present moment.
And all of that goes back to choosing what to give a fuck about, right? Not in a careless way, but in a conscious and deliberate way.
It's about being intentional with your time and energy, recognizing that there are limited resources and investing them in things that align with your values.
So saying no to the things that drain us,
Yeah.
the things that don't serve us.
So that you could say yes to the things that truly matter.
And ultimately, it's about embracing our imperfections, accepting our limitations and finding beauty in this messy reality of being human.
And letting go of the need to have it all figured out. Just being present in each moment as it unfolds.
Manson ends the book with this really powerful story about encountering a stranger at the Cape of Good Hope.
Oh, yeah, after his experience at the cliff.
Right. And the stranger noticed his exhilaration and asked if he was okay.
And what does Manson say?
Alive, very alive.
I love that story.
Yeah.
It really gets to the heart of what he's trying to convey. It's not about avoiding pain or seeking constant happiness.
Right. It's about embracing the full spectrum of human experience.
The good, the bad, and everything in between.
It's about finding meaning and purpose even in the face of our own mortality, and ultimately choosing to live a life that is authentic, courageous, and full of love.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the subtle art of not giving a F, I want to leave you with this question. If death is our compass, what values should guide your life? What truly matters to you?
It's a question that we hope will stay with you long after this deep dive is over. And if you haven't already, we highly recommend checking out Manson's book and continuing this journey of self-discovery. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep.